Tonight, one-on-one with the UN Global Ambassador for Climate Change.
What do you think that message should be from CARICOM?
10 days to COP28, from climate justice to climate finance.
I think the World Bank is tested and tried. It's already established. I may have preferred another entity, if I'm being honest.
Now, on CNC3, Racquel Moses.
Racquel Moses, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Ryan.
We are mere days away from COP28 in Dubai. What are your feelings?
I'm hopeful, I'm excited, I'm nervous, and a little terrified, all of the above.
Let's explore those feelings of nerves and fear.
Yes.
What are you feared about?
We've been looking forward to loss and damage, and that's a huge part of what at the Accelerator we're advocating for. We had a breakthrough last year. After years and years of discussing it, they finally agreed to create a loss and damage fund. The first set of talks on the loss and damage fund that were supposed to be operationalized coming out of this COP, and that loss and damage fund is how are countries that are directly impacted by climate change, how do they cover the losses that they experience when, either slow onset, meaning things like droughts happen, or immediate things like flash flooding or hurricanes. How do we recover from those things? Because these activities are based on the carbon in the atmosphere that we didn't cause. And how are we compensated for those things? And so this fund is really critical to how we protect ourselves.
You are the United Nations Global Ambassador for Climate Change. How disappointed are you in the international community towards a loss and damage fund that will ultimately help small island and developing states? By the way, just for the benefit of our audience, these small island developing states are not very rich. Some of them are very prone to the effects of climate change. Others are already grappling with those droughts that you speak of. How disappointed are you in the likes of the United States, large European countries, large Asian countries that have not gotten on board?
It's less a matter of disappointment, because we talk about those countries as though it's a single entity. Those countries are made up of people. And those people are, like us, self-interested. So we have to start speaking to them from a position of understanding what is happening to us. It will happen to them and is happening to them as well. And they have to be responsible. But we have to speak to the voters at their level and based on what they are interested in. I think it's a matter of strategy, and I think it's a matter of reaching people and reaching their conscience so that they understand the impacts of the decisions that they take every day.
Loss and damage funding was the big ticket item at COP27. Do you think it will retain as a big ticket item at COP28?
Well, I think there are two things that are top of the list for this COP. The global stocktake, so that we understand what countries are doing and how they are contributing to the commitments that they've made coming out of the Paris Agreement. And the second thing is how this loss and damage fund is being operationalized. Now, we've made some progress over the course of the last year, which is amazing, but I think this is where the rubber meets the road.
I mean, you say we've made progress, but up until the early start of November, the United States was still very adamant that it didn't want any real part of a loss and damage fund, especially with regards to the G77 plus China. Obviously, we are aware of the geopolitical issues that surrounds that. But we're heading into this COP. How confident are you that the voters that you speak of that really need to nail this operationalization of the loss and damage fund down, that they will come to a common agreement?
I have faith in the negotiators. We have amazing negotiators, Kishan Kumar Singh, Ruana Haynes. A lot of the people who are behind the scenes advocating on behalf of the region are doing incredible work. And so I have faith in them. Last year, we were doubtful that we would get a decision on loss and damage. And lo and behold, we got a decision. This year, we know that they want to nest the loss and damage fund in the World Bank. There are mixed reviews on doing that. But again, that's progress. And we have to count our wins. Otherwise, we will continue to be stuck.
You've been a great advocate for climate finance, not only for the CARICOM region, but more so for small island and developing states. Where is your position on loss and damage fund being linked to the World Bank?
So, I think the World Bank is tested and tried. It's already established. I may have preferred another entity, if I'm being honest, but I also didn't want them to try and start something entirely from scratch. That takes time, and the enemy that we have is time. We don't have time to start anything from scratch. So World Bank, we will try them, and I hope they step up to the challenge.
Do you fear that if an entity like the World Bank is in charge of climate finance, and let's just say to a lesser extent loss and damage funding, that we can end up in a position something like the Green Climate Fund, where it's supposed to be accessible to those who need it the most, but the process by which to get access to the fund is just so rigorous, so red taped, that it often doesn't reach those who need it the most?
I think that's what everybody's concerned about. But I also have great empathy for the Green Climate Fund, as much as I know that they are working on improving their processes and speeding up the throughput of their funding. But we have to do things much, much faster. The scale at which we have to work is completely different if we are going to meet the obligations we've set and the goals that we have for 2030.
You've mentioned a couple of names, including Kishan Kumar Singh and Rana Haynes, incredible Trinbagonians representing this country and the Caribbean region on the global stage when it comes to climate change. However, I just wonder, what are your thoughts when it comes to Caribbean leadership at this summit? They came with a common message at both COP26 and COP27. We can expect much of the same at COP28. What do you think that message should be from CARICOM?
I think that message should be that we need to be clear about how much funding we need. I am 100% behind the Bridgetown initiative, because I think that freeing up climate finance, especially grant finance and concessional funding, is imperative to meeting the goals that we've set. I love the idea of them singing from the same hymn sheet. I think that there is more that they can do to be more aligned, and I'm hearing some really good things about their alignment coming into this COP. So I'm, again, hopeful, optimistic, but I have my reservations as well.
Out of curiosity, what are those reservations?
I think a lot of times, we behave as though, as much as we are independent nations and independent islands, we need each other, and we won't survive without each other. And we behave as though that's not a fact, right? Like we're an island, we can survive, but we're interdependent. And I think that recognition and that humility around that interdependence is really important for our regional leaders to take on board.
Is that also where you think we can be more in alignment?
Absolutely, absolutely. And rather than thinking about things from a nationalistic perspective, and again, that's what voters vote for. Eh? You vote for, I want you to look after the concerns in the country, but I also want us to think strategically about how do we improve the lives of Caribbean people by collaborating across the region, rather than thinking about, okay, well, this is how I secure food security. And CARICOM is doing a lot on 25 by 25 and reducing our food imports, and I want to see more around that.
Coming up next, the world faces its first global stocktake.
Would you be disappointed if loss and damage funding is relegated in importance at COP28?
You said disappointed. I feel I would be devastated. We cannot continue to sustain these losses and cover them out of the public purse. It's not sustainable. It's not. We have too much development to do to adapt to the changes that are already taking place. We can't possibly sustain any more damage and pay for it.
I ask with a specific emphasis because loss and damage funding made its way to an agenda item at COP27, very big deal for small island and developing states. However, if it's taken almost 1 year to COP28, just back and forth between negotiations, a lot of different opinions between SIDS as well as developed countries, do you fear that the larger nations will come with a different agenda? to what SIDS are hoping for?
I think we're all but assured that they will. But what we're seeing is that despite our size, we are a force to be reckoned with when we work together. So I do think that we have an opportunity at this COP to be collaborative and to ensure that not only are we speaking to the leaders of the global north and the developed countries, but we're also speaking to the citizens of those countries so that they understand what's at stake. When you ask people in the US, do you want more or less migrants coming to your shores? Most people will tell you, we want less. Okay, well, when you devastate countries that are have not contributed to climate change, but then they can't live in the countries where they are, what do you think is going to happen?
AOSIS, the Alliance of Small Island Developing States, how critical will their role be? It was on the back of AOSIS, and I will also mention Prime Minister Gaston Brown, because he was chair of AOSIS at COP27. He did and deserves credit for pushing loss and damage funding over the line as an agenda item. Will AOSIS and could AOSIS be the difference for small island and developing states at COP?
I think AOSIS has contributed so much that people don't even recognize, 1.5 to stay alive, and a lot of what happens in the background on behalf of SIDS is on AOSIS's back. And so we are grateful for AOSIS and the work that they continue to do. And a lot of it, Ambassador Blacklane from Antigua and Barbuda, all of that amazing work that they do to make sure that our voices are heard.
Let's talk a little bit about a global stocktake. You mentioned that could be the second big ticket item. And in fact, I would venture to say it's the first, because this is the first global stocktake there will be since the Paris Agreement. And Racquel, it doesn't look good for many countries, including Trinidad and Tobago.
No, it doesn't look good. But I think the one thing that I am hopeful and encouraged about in the global stocktake, it's like when you're putting on weight, right? Whether or not you get on the scale, you're putting on the pounds. So at some point you got to get on the scale and reckon with where you are in order to address the situation.
But do you feel that us weighing ourselves on the scale as a globe when it comes to climate change will be the reality check, the slap in the face that we need?
I think so. I think, the report that just came out, I think it may have been a few days ago, about the impact of climate change in the US, and that there isn't anywhere in the US that hasn't been affected. Climate change has come home. They are now, China's having experiences, the US is having experiences, Europe is having experiences. I don't think that we're in a position now to be ostriches and bury our heads. Everyone is being impacted. And at some point, you have to take responsibility.
I want to laugh a little bit, because a couple years ago, when I was doing COP26, we labeled it the most important meeting in the history of our planet. And 2 years later, it's become so much more critical now, given that we've had unprecedented temperatures in Trinidad and Tobago, across the Caribbean. The rainfall itself has been more violent. Do you feel that the glaring change in temperatures, the glaring change in climate will add to the urgency at COP28, or is it just going to be commercialized and marketed as yet another incredibly important summit that really doesn't yield what we hope that it yields?
I think that there's incremental progress. I don't think that we are seeing enough progress, but there's incremental progress from COP to COP. And that keeps me encouraged and hopeful, because if we don't recognize the fact that we are making baby steps and we're walking too slowly, but we're walking, that if we don't recognize that, we will just throw up our hands and say all is lost. All is not lost. And there is still time, but it's not time to be wasted. It is time for action.
All right, you say we've been making incremental progress. The world sighed when the United Arab Emirates, to be specific, Dubai, was named as the host country for the United Nations Climate Change Conference, the 28th of its kind, when Dubai, a country that is projected to produce 40 billion barrels of oil by 2085.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on Dubai hosting one of the most important climate meetings there is?
I think it's good, because we have to have oil and gas at the conversation. Having this conversation without them is pointless, because they are the ones that need to take many of the actions that are required. But they're not going to take it on their own, and they're not going to take it without pressure. But we can't absolve ourselves of responsibility either, because at the end of the day, we are the ones, when you turn on your lights, when you buy something in the store, we are the ones who are supporting the business. And so we have to start thinking more about conservation, but also taking action with our actions to let them know that we are serious.
I'm smiling a little bit, Racquel, because you've been to COPs. You are an integral part of these conferences. I mean, you give speeches there, you're part of panel discussions, and you're well aware that a major problem at these conferences is that these oil and gas companies send lobbyists that are paid millions of dollars a year to lobby on their behalf. So it's a really grave concern to have it in a country that is oil and gas based not only, but also has critical influence and influential people that infiltrate these conferences. Am I making sense?
Definitely. That is a part of the challenge. And we don't, what we can't do is ignore that, right? We can't pretend like that's not what's happening, and we can't pretend like this COP is going to be like every other COP, and because the influence of the oil and gas industry on this climate conference is only increasing. But we also have to recognize that the reason that they're paying closer attention is because they're frightened and they see their livelihoods being threatened. I think that's a good thing, because it means that we must be making progress if they're getting nervous and if they're getting so involved, albeit to try and derail the process. What we have to do is to stay steady, stay the course, and continue to pressure them on the basis of what's important to them, and let them understand that the important thing for them to do is to transition. They're not in the business of oil and gas, they're in the business of energy, just as Trinidad and Tobago is in the business of energy. The future of energy is in renewables. The future of energy is in hydrogen. We need to start thinking about how do you make sure, this is like somebody advocating for dial-up when we're talking about broadband. No, move with the times, get ahead. Determine how you are competitive in the new economy that's being created.
Coming up, is COP serving its purpose?
It's not perfect, but it's like democracy. It's not perfect, but it's the best solution that we have.
Go back to the global stocktake a little bit, and specific to Trinidad and Tobago. We haven't moved as far forward as we hoped that the country and the region would be. And to a much broader extent, I just wonder if having a conversation and having a global stocktake in Dubai, how much sense it makes if at the end of 2 wonderful weeks in a very fancy city, all countries get for failing to meet their targets is a slap on the wrist.
I think it's going to be more than a slap on the wrist. I think it's going to be a recognition. But my fear is that everybody's like, oh, well, we're all doing poorly. What I'd like to see, honestly, is that we treat this like the Olympics. That everybody's competing to say, well, I made the most progress. And it isn't so much, window dressing about progress, but that the ones who have made legitimate progress are really proud of the progress that they've made. And then they use that to lord it above the others, who then get jealous and try to do the same. You have places like Costa Rica that are 100% renewable energy already. You have places like DR, they've had amazing implementation of renewables. Jamaica's issued several RFPs. Barbados has changed many of their policies. Even Trinidad has commissioned a solar farm. So we're making progress. Not enough, but this needs to be the basis of how we compete with each other.
Some people say, Racquel, that we've had 28 of these conferences. Some people now fear it's just become a wonderful global talk shop where everybody spends 2 weeks in a very nice city and then leave. Has COP served its purpose, given that we've only managed incremental progress over the last 3 decades?
What's the alternative? I think that, it's not perfect, but it's like democracy. It's not perfect, but it's the best solution that we have. So until we come up with something that helps us to move faster and achieve the objectives that we've set, then this is what we've got, and we've got to work with it. I find that for me, what's more important the donors that we meet with on the sidelines, the ones that we bring to the region, the deals that we're able to put together, the heads of nations that we meet with. You know, we've launched our Climate Smart Agriculture project in Cayman, Barbados, and Anguilla over the course of the last year. And a lot of that has been through relationships we developed at COP.
You've been the United Nations Global Ambassador for Climate Change at Trinbagonian right here in Trinidad and Tobago. Has the country become more aware? Is the country educated enough on why the sun is so much hotter and why the rain is so much violent? Do you feel that we've done enough to educate our population on why things are changing before our very eyes?
So, two separate questions. Are we more educated? Yes. Have we done enough? No. And I think the communication issue is a constant thing. People need to understand the things that they can do, how they impact, you know, how they impact the climate, you know, creating unnecessary waste, using plastic when you don't need to, being inefficient, using air conditioning all the time, leaving on lights in your house, simple things like that. And I know it doesn't feel as though one person can make a difference, but we're 8 billion single people. If we can all just, you know, make changes that can help us to slow down the change, I think a lot of people are becoming aware, but definitely not enough.
Has there been sufficient legislation from those in authority to back up what you've just said, to force people, to make people live the type of lifestyles that are more sustainable?
It depends on whether or not I think legislation is the answer. You know, I think that we should have implemented a single-use plastics ban years ago. We were talking about it before Barbados and Jamaica and Antigua, and somehow they've implemented it and we're still talking. So no, but I don't think that legislation is the only solution. I also think that people need to, you know, they were teaching, you know, don't litter. When I was in school, I'm now a fairly old person. So why are we still seeing people littering all over the place? I mean, citizens have to start taking personal responsibility as well.
If you had a wish list for Dubai, what would it be?
It would absolutely be that they figure out where we're going next and how loss and damage is being funded. And that, you know, we leave there with some semblance of the establishment of that fund. Certainly that the global stocktake isn't as bad as we think it's going to be, and that there are some absolute stars coming out of it that everyone is jealous of. I also would love for us to bring back some new donors to the region so that we have more money to give to projects so that we can get more momentum.
I'm so glad that you mentioned bringing back some more donors to the Caribbean region, because attending COP27 in Egypt showed one thing to me, that the divide, the gap between small island developing states and developed nations, it's the Atlantic Ocean.
Yeah.
And how do you propose, and how critical is it that that gap is bridged at COP28, given the extremities of the weather patterns that we've seen, not just here in the Caribbean region, but around the world?
I'll tell you, working with Open Society Foundation and Tides Foundation, they did an analysis of funding that came to the region between 2015 and 2021. $7 billion in philanthropy came to the region. Now that's not total, but that's what they were able to sort of track. Of that $7 billion, do you know how much of it went to Puerto Rico and USVI? 75%. So we're not getting our fair share of philanthropy, and we haven't had the wealth of the carbon in the atmosphere to rely on. And on top of all of that, we're not competitive when it comes to applying for all of the big money grants that are going on. So we are continuously being put on the back foot, and we have to rectify that. We have to convince donors that the Caribbean is a region to invest in, that we have phenomenal talent like you, and that we need to make sure that this talent has the opportunity to be on an international stage, to compete for the best prizes, to create some of the solutions that we're going to use globally in addressing this climate crisis. And I think that is what we want to advocate for and make sure that people can see.
And a lot of that you speak of will depend on what we do have. Great advocates. A couple of years ago, Prime Minister Mia Mottley delivered one of the best addresses a COP has ever seen. Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley, he will travel to Dubai, as I understand it. that Caribbean voice advocating for those things, how important will that be for the people of Latin America and the Caribbean?
Massive, massive. You know, the sound bites created by Mia Motley reverberate.
Went viral.
For years, yeah. And so, and over and over and over. And people are paying attention. You know, she can pick up the phone and call Emmanuel Macron and Joe Biden, and people are hearing her, and she's advocating on behalf of the region. That's priceless.
What do you hope now that we've gotten to COP? You mentioned that loss and damage funding, big ticket item, the global Stocktake as well. What are your personal hopes as you jet off to Dubai? You are the United Nations Global Ambassador for Climate Change. You are tasked with speaking up not only for the CARICOM region, but SIDS as well. What are your personal hopes for this mission?
I'm hoping that we finally understand how critical it is. I think you were right when you talked about COP26 was the most important conference at that time, but so was 27, and now 28 is as well. The stakes are continuing to rise. So my hope is that we see even more progress and that we come back, each and every one of us, from that conference with something tangible that we can then use to move the ball down the field.
Racquel Moses, 2 years ago, we sat in this very same room. That was my very first climate change interview and the embryonic stages of me covering climate change. 2 years later, we're sitting here again. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, and how wonderful you've been.
Thank you so much.